My name is Anthony Horan and I'm the Director of the Catholic Parliamentary Office, an agency of the Bishops' Conference of Scotland, working on behalf of the bishops in the world of politics. You can find out more about the work of the office at our website rcpolitics.org, and we're also on Facebook and Twitter. But today I'd like to talk to you about the general election. Now, the 8 bishops of Scotland have recently issued a letter to all Catholics in advance of the general election, and in the letter, which I'll read out in a moment, the bishops encourage Catholics to engage with political candidates on a range of issues, including the right to life, marriage, poverty, Brexit, freedom of religion and conscience, and also a call for a more respectful politics. Now, the letter reads as follows. The general election presents us with an opportunity to reflect on Catholic social teaching. As Christians, we have a civic and a moral duty to engage with our democracy. As Catholics, we believe that the primary goal of society should be the common good, that is, the good of all people and of the whole person. Indeed, the common good is the very reason that political authority exists in the first place. This election provides an opportunity to reflect on the beauty and goodness of church teaching and to keep that teaching at the forefront of our minds as we engage with candidates across all parties. During elections, a range of issues compete for your attention, and the bishops in this letter highlight some of them in the hope that you will reflect on them and raise them with your candidates. The first issue that the bishops raise is that of human life. Human life at every stage of development is precious and must be protected. Any laws which permit the willful ending of life must always be rejected as reprehensible and unjust. We must create a culture of life where the most vulnerable are valued and their dignity respected. The undeniable value of human life, created in the image and likeness of God, is fundamental to the Catholic faith. We should remind our politicians that abortion, assisted suicide, and euthanasia are always morally unacceptable. They then talk about marriage and the family, saying that society relies on the building block of the family to exist. The love of man and woman in marriage and their openness to new life is the very basic cell upon which society is built. The well-being of society depends on the flourishing and health of family life, and those in authority should respond to this with policies that create economic and other advantages for families with children. Poverty. Sadly, poverty continues to be a scourge for many at home and abroad. Too many people still struggle to make ends meet. And this sad reality cannot and should not endure in our country in the 21st century. Our concerns should also extend to providing international assistance while ensuring that aid is not used to support immoral practices such as those which compromise the basic right to life. Refugees, asylum seekers and immigration. The United Kingdom should be a place where the most vulnerable are welcomed and given the necessary resources to rebuild their lives. At the same time, we should provide for those people living in and around conflict areas and conflict zones and commit to working towards the peaceful resolution of all conflict. Living in Europe, there are millions of EU citizens living in the UK and millions of UK citizens living across the EU. Mindful of the uncertainty affecting them, candidates should commit to working towards delivering stability and security for them in future. Our politicians should forge and renew international partnerships and establish rights for those who wish to work in the UK in a spirit of cooperation and friendship. They then talk about freedom of religion and conscience, saying that millions of people worldwide are persecuted for their beliefs. People of faith, including Christians, should be able to freely practice their faith and bear witness to it in their lives without fear of prejudice, intolerance, abuse and even violence. Candidates should be committed to the rights of people not to be forced to act against their conscience. And nuclear weapons and the arms trade, the bishops say that the use of any weapon that causes more than individual and proportionate harm to civilians is immoral and thus rejected by the Church. The use of weapons of mass destruction is a serious crime against God and against humanity. And while states are entitled to possess the means required for legitimate defence, this must not become an excuse for an excessive accumulation of weaponry which becomes a considerable threat to stability and freedom. And then the bishops talk about respectful politics. They say often politicians are tempted to score points or resort to insults. We need politicians who are willing to change this and to take politics in a new direction, where dialogue is respectful and where different points of view, including those of a religious nature, are tolerated. And they finish up by saying, as we cast our votes in this election, let us bear in mind the words of Pope Francis when he said, "The greatness of any nation is revealed in its effective care of society's most vulnerable members. Our nation, our parliament, and our government will be judged on how it treats its poorest and most vulnerable citizens." Yours devotedly in Christ, the 8 Bishops of Scotland. Now, this letter sends out a very strong message ahead of the general election, along with the very traditional, yet hugely important and significant calls to appreciate the sanctity of human life and to work hard to eradicate the scourge of poverty and to challenge candidates on the right to the likes of freedom of religion and conscience. The bishops have also called, and interestingly so, called for a more respectful politics, something I suspect many of us would wholeheartedly support. The bishop's letter also ends on a very powerful note, quoting the words of Pope Francis, saying that the greatness of any nation is revealed in its effective care of society's most vulnerable members. The bishops then reinforce this point by stating our nation, our parliament and our government will be judged on how it treats its poorest and most vulnerable citizens. This letter sends out a powerful message to candidates hoping to be elected in constituencies across the land, but it also sends out a powerful message to us, the Catholic voters. Indeed, the main point of this letter is to challenge Catholic voters to consider matters of great importance for our society, seen in light of church teaching which has at its heart the common good of all people. As Catholic people and people of Christ, we are called to be messengers of God's truth and love and to be a shining light to all people. That's why it's so important for us to take on board the wise words of our bishops and the teaching of the Church, and to take these with us as we engage with candidates and enter the voting booth. Our faith, as the bishops suggest, should be at the forefront of our minds. And as the bishops say in their letter, we have a civic and moral duty to engage with our democracy. This means more than simply turning up at your local polling station on election day. It means exploring candidates and ascertaining their views on important issues, and perhaps even questioning them on sensitive matters like abortion. They are seeking to serve you in Parliament, so you shouldn't be afraid to challenge them, and you shouldn't be afraid to challenge them after the election once they're elected as MPs. And that's very much the case for our MSPs as well, who represent us in the Scottish Parliament. The bishops in their letter also talk about the election providing an opportunity to reflect on the beauty and goodness of Catholic teaching, of church teaching. Now, let's be very mindful of this advice and carry our Catholic faith with us as we engage with politics. The bishops are acutely aware of the difficulties we face in a society that seems to have very little time for religion and religious values, as many people will often resort to mockery and insults at the very mention of faith in public life. But we can't simply ignore the need to question candidates on important issues and which are fundamental to a peaceful, tolerant society, where every human being is respected and loved. And let's not shy away also from our civic duty. And most importantly, let's not shy away from being Christian in our approach.